Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of SUGTalks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guests, we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges, and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. I'm delighted to be joined today by Philip Adams, Head of Group IT at Mercury, also a member of the UK ISUG Board of Directors, previously serving as chair, and also a member of the leadership team of the SAP User Group Executive Network, a network of over 20 user groups from around the world. And also Simon Carpenter, the SAP UK and Ireland lead for SAP's Centre of Excellences. So welcome to you both. And we're here today to talk about the coming out of the pandemic, the VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous conditions that we're going to be coming out in, and what that means for businesses going forward. But before we do that, I'd just like to find out a little bit about you both for our listeners, and maybe set up a theme for when we're able to next meet in face-to-face. So a question to you is, if you had to sing karaoke, what would be your go-to song? Simon.
Sure, that's a good one. Wow. Probably something from Springsteen, because I really like Bruce Springsteen. Maybe I wasn't born in the USA, I was actually born in Zimbabwe, but I like the energy in the song.
That might fit, actually, wasn't it? Born in Zimbabwe. Yeah, that would work.
We could make it work.
Thank you. Philip?
Yeah, probably something from Queen. It's strange. I've got two small boys. They're definitely not of the Queen generation, given their age, but yet they just seem to warm to that music, and I think it's ultimately timeless. And nearly they have a song for nearly every occasion. So I reckon it would be something from their catalogue.
I think you're right.
Yeah, they were. I was lucky enough to see them live, and what a fantastic performer old Freddie Mercury was there.
Oh wow, that's something to live long in the memory. That, and yeah, I think they do appeal to everybody. I think I'd probably go for a Meatloaf number. So, there's probably a set list there we could recreate between the three of us, and after several beers, really get into that and have the evening going. Thank you both for that insight. And moving on to our main topic of discussion, as I said, we're taking our first steps emerging from the pandemic, coming out and blinking into the daylight, if you like, bit by bit around the world, and the effects on the world as business has been profound in many ways. The acronym VUCA, as I mentioned, talking about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, has been used to describe the conditions that, we currently inhabit. So Simon, just to lead us into the discussion, can you share your thoughts around, what the world will be like coming out of the pandemic and the challenges that lie ahead?
Yeah, I think it would be quite presumptuous to try and predict exactly what the world's going to be like. I think the only thing we can say with any certainty is it is not going to be what we were used to before we went into this pandemic. If you think about what was happening before the pandemic, there were already some sort of secular trends that we all had to contend with. The underlying drive towards digitization, which of course the pandemic accelerated. But we also were looking at, some of the geopolitical things that are happening around the world, the trade wars that are going on, the social change that was bubbling under, and that, of course, has also been accelerated by the pandemic. And this trend or not trend, but this requirement to really run our businesses a lot more sustainably than we ever had to do in the past. So that all of those aspects are driving a high level of change. And I think what we're also seeing is the access to technology that is now much more widespread and much more affordable is driving new types of competition that we haven't had to contend with in the past. So taken together, the world we're going to move into, the big changes, I think, are going to be challenges to leadership in terms of, really setting a purpose for an organization and getting everyone moving in the same direction. They're going to be around how do you manage a workforce that is now used to working from home and in many cases going to want to continue doing that? How do you reconfigure supply chains for your business? Because one of the things we have seen is that some of the long, just-in-time type of supply chains that organizations are part of were quite fragile when challenged by factory closures or transport link closures because of the pandemic. So the supply chain is a big issue. And of course, sustainability. We do face, I think, an existential crisis as a species if we don't really come to grips with how we're using the resources of the planet and what we're doing in terms of the emissions and pollution that we create. So lots to deal with. And fortunately for us as the user group and as SAP, we've kind of got part of the solution is in our hands with all of the data that we can create in the systems that we use to manage our businesses. And if we can get better at, joining that data up, analyzing it and acting on it, we can be more responsive to these VUCA conditions that will prevail going forward.
And you mentioned, I think, early the digitization, and then we went into leadership challenges. I think one of the key things that came to my mind when you were talking about that was the transformation of businesses and in their entirety, and how that has affected companies going forward, having to transform their businesses quite dramatically. Have you seen any of that, Philip, from your perspective?
Yes, I suppose from my business perspective, we're in the construction industry, so to a certain extent, the majority of our workforce to be able to do the job we did had to be in a remote location on a construction site doing it anyway. So apart from the initial phase of disruption when certain countries might have closed the construction industry or sites were impacted by outbreaks or whatever, that was small disruption. But our business, like so many other businesses who weren't necessarily directly affected, were able to operate. And in fact, we even saw an acceleration of the requirements coming from our clients because one of the sectors we operate in is construction of data centers. And as a result of our global workforce almost moving online and using applications, Microsoft Teams and Zoom, whatever it happens to be, and moving to that online space, there was almost a greater demand for the need for data centers, whether they be hyperscale or enterprise. So we actually saw an upturn in our pipeline of work and the demand coming from our clients. So, but I do appreciate in other industries it was a lot different. They were impacted so much differently as a result of the situation. But apart from maybe the pandemic being a global factor, factors that cause disruption happen all the time. Businesses, I believe, over the last number of years and generations have learned to adapt much faster because the rate of change that is either brought about by market conditions or advances in technology almost forces you into that position. Gone are the days when you can define a strategy and it lasts for 5, 10 plus years. Nowadays, strategies are much shorter. I think you need to define them and execute them in a shorter time frame. And as a result, many organizations who have either managed through this and will obviously adapt as we embark on the other side of this over the next number of months, and the ones that will thrive will be the ones that have used to doing that and have actually been built that into their ethos and culture. So I think like everything else in the world, you'll just see different industries, different businesses emerging on the other side at a different pace.
Yeah, and I certainly think when you look at that, the effect that you were talking about on your business and the effect Simon was talking about. When I look at our business in the user group and how we've managed throughout the pandemic and the changes, and the fine balance, I think, you were talking about challenges for leadership and workforce management, Simon, is the challenge I find is, especially for leadership, is getting the balance right, doing what's right for employees going forward, and also managing what's right for the business and what works best for the business in that environment, and getting that right. I see that as certainly a key challenge. And I suppose trust plays a big part in a lot of the things we're doing here, in kind of building trust and ensuring we've got trust throughout, not just in our business per se, but in the whole of the business network we engage in.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you've just made there, Craig, and I can only reflect on it from my perspective as an SAP employee. And throughout this pandemic, and in fact, well before the pandemic hit, one of the great joys of working at SAP is that the company really does take care of its employees. And I think when you do that, you engender that level of trust and engagement that when you ask the employees to make some kind of sacrifice, maybe because of an issue like the pandemic, people are more ready to step up to the plate and do that. So it's not about the business or the employees. I think the employees are the business. So you've really got to think about how you take care of them, or you probably don't have a business. Or if you do, you don't have the best talent that you could have in the organization. And that's going to hamper your performance and your innovation and things like that.
And I was reading an article earlier today, actually, I think it was in Forbes, where SAP have announced a full move to flexible working contracts, I think, for everybody too. So they even pushing the envelope further.
Yeah. And I think, Philip, I'd love to hear your take on what that's going to do to the sort of urban setting and construction and, going forward, because you've seen these stories in the press of some really large organizations, committing to work from home going forward, which raises the question, what happens to all that real estate that was previously being used for offices?
Yeah, that's interesting.
A good question. Thankfully for Mercury, it's a line of the construction industry we aren't involved in. We didn't get involved in commercial. We very much focus on the good side. As I said, it's our key sectors are data centers, pharmaceutical and life sciences, microchip development companies and organizations. So for us, we're happy that that's a sector or a pipeline of work that is not going to dry up necessarily. But yeah, you're right. I come back to the point. I think there is this desire now of a portion of a workforce who have now been used to working from home. And some will stay there, and I see that in our own organization, and we haven't actually got the answer worked out ourselves. And many organizations I've spoken to are still almost sitting on the fence to see who really wants to go back to the office, who wants to stay at home, and there's quite a large volume probably in the middle who would like both options, where work in a hybrid environment where they figure out just working remotely is just not necessarily that you're not productive, but you lose that cohesion, that collaboration, that feeling of belonging to an organization, to an objective, to a project, whatever it happens to be. And they like the idea potentially that they can do both. And I think that's actually going to be even a tougher challenge for organizations to figure out, well, how much office space do we need to have, and how do we facilitate this ability of people not necessarily in one location but wanting to have the option to go to two, and probably that will work out over time. But as organizations, we're going to have to learn to adapt to that, because there still is a war for talent out there. It is difficult to attract the people you need and retain them. I think that's common in a lot of industries. So as a result, these are the sort of practices that you need to have figured out, so that you can provide that option, because that could be the make or break of somebody joining your organization and you attracting the right people you need to deliver what you need to do. It could be as simple as, well, what are you offering them in terms of that option to to work, and the technologies that you've got in place to allow them to do their job as well. So it's going to be very interesting and how it all pans out. But I think, over time, we're very adaptable and we will figure it out, and organizations will learn to, and some will be outliers and lead it, and others will be playing catch up. But I suspect over time it'll balance out.
The UK and Ireland SAP User Group is a not-for-profit membership organisation designed to help you to get the very best out of your SAP investments and make your job easier. Our focus is bringing the whole SAP community together so our members can learn, network and collaborate to improve their organisation, providing an independent channel through which to influence SAP. For more information and a special offer for our podcast listeners, please visit sapusers.org/pod or email support@sapusers.org. Enjoy the rest of the pod.
Yeah, that element there of, talking about the technology and what you were saying earlier about digitalization, Simon, the whole, it's almost like the pandemic has driven the digitization agenda for a lot of companies because it was forced upon them. And is that, do you think, made people look at innovation more to fuel kind of growth of the business going forward?
I think so. I mean, that's certainly what we're seeing. Again, it's not universal across the board because I think to the point Philip made earlier on, it's got a lot to do with how your industry was impacted by the pandemic. But in those industries that were, badly affected, for example, from a revenue point of view, we're now seeing organizations looking to go round perhaps the retail channels that they historically relied on, but which got shut down during the pandemic, and start going more directly to the consumer, which raises a host of new challenges around how you manage your supply chain, how you manage returns, and of course profitability, because you now no longer have perhaps quite the same cost dynamics in your supply chain. But again, it comes down to, if you've got the information available and you can drive the right sort of analytics on top of it, you can make those kind of decisions and understand the trade-offs, as Philip was saying earlier on.
So we're kind of talking there a lot about the tomorrow's world, what's going to happen and the uncertainty around that. So what other jobs do you see that need doing to transform for tomorrow's world? We've talked about leadership, we've talked about building trust, we've talked about workforce management, and one of the things you also mentioned was sustainability, Simon.
Yeah. So I think if I was to sort of collapse it into, say, 5 or 6 categories, the big jobs that need to be done, you've mentioned leadership, and I think the big task there is setting a strong sense of purpose, not just for the organization, but for the ecosystem you operate in, because increasingly we all know that the folks who are buying stuff from you across the generations, by the way, I don't think this is just a Gen Z and millennial thing, but consumers want to know where this came from. Was it justly and equitably and sustainably produced, whether it's something I'm going to wear or put down my throat. So that's really important. Then, of course, as a CEO or a CFO, part of your mandate is to grow the business. So there you've got to think about, how do I open up new channels to the market that will allow me to grow? How do I bring new offerings to the market? So innovation starts to be a really important job that needs to be done. Productivity. I think over the next few years, this is going to be a really important thing to focus on, because we're operating in muted economic conditions in many cases, and growing the top line is going to be hard. So you've got to protect the bottom line, and one way to do that is make everything in your business more productive. The people, the assets, the raw materials, everything. And automation can help to do that in a big way. And of course, that also feeds into sustainability, because if you're using things more efficiently, theoretically there should be less waste in your value chain. And then I think another element that's really important, and you saw this recently, you saw Colonial, I think it's called Colonial Oil, get shut down by a ransomware attack and basically put half of the east coast of America's oil deliveries at risk. And this week there was an announcement of a major food producer being shut down, again by a ransomware attack. So I think cybersecurity, in all that entails, is another big task that organizations need to be focusing on. So that's
Certainly.
a bit of a wilderness, but they've all got to be done.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, we were chatting as we were coming into this conversation around cybersecurity and security from your side, Philip, and protecting the business. A big challenge for everybody, and one that, from my own perspective, where we had a little phishing attack, and I know your business is quite hot on.
Yeah, like it's very topical. Obviously, I'm a part of the Irish contingent of the UK and Ireland SAP user group, and the National Health Service for Ireland, the Health Service Executive, was hit by a ransomware attack just 4 weeks tomorrow. And that's our complete health system in the country was not ground to a halt, but was severely impacted in terms of the services that they deliver. And so it's a very, very topical conversation at the minute in the entire country. In fact, I think it was the only thing that was capable of knocking COVID off the headlines, the daily headline. So it's very real. It's very real for a lot of organizations. There wouldn't be a magazine or an article you'd lift around this area that clearly says that year on year, the threat mechanism, the vectors, the sophistication of the criminals, even the value of the ransoms they're now asking is just increasing. It used to be small monies, now they're asking for large, it's multi-million euro ransoms they're holding organizations to account. So it's very, very real. And it's real for every industry, I suspect. And the more, obviously, we all want to move forward with our technology footprint. So ironically, doing that in parallel with trying to protect the business is just now part of the business. And there's an element too that, it is a fine balance, and this is where the likes of health services and hospitals strike that balance. If you have a defined or finite budget, trying to decide, do you spend it on new services for your patients or protection of the existing services, is a difficult conversation, and that's no different in any organization. So trying to do that along with what Simon's referring to, sustainability, is critical, and everyone expects it and expects you to have that as part of your core delivery model. I think on the sustainability front, just to go back to that one, in the past I always felt, and the feedback I was talking with, not just within our own organization but others, that it tended to be to do something green tended to cost you money. Now organizations are really looking at, actually, how can we make this an opportunity for our business? How can this actually either generate revenue, improve profit margin, and even a competitive edge? So it is starting to flip, whereby this is becoming part of your strategy simply because you need to be there to stay competitive. And it's huge within my industry because obviously there's a focus on the carbon footprint during a construction cycle, but also actually the building and the life cycle of that building. And we've been partnering with a couple of key organizations around this concept and measuring the embodied carbon. Because we see this is what the clients expect, this is what we see the public and just the community at large expect to understand and ensure that when you're doing something, you're doing it on a sustainable footprint. So yeah, there's lots of factors there. Just trying to grow your organization, but yeah, look at the security, look at the sustainability aspect, look at the talent and the recruitment. It's juggling all of those is obviously a challenge.
And you're doing it at faster and faster pace, as you mentioned earlier, Philip.
Yeah, you don't have any you can't, these things now, you might have had months or years to figure this out and execute. Now you don't. It's there, the cycles are so quick, and you can find yourself behind the curve very, very easily if you just lift your eye off that ball.
Yeah, well, what is it? The only constant is change.
Yeah, Philip, this pace of change thing, we all acknowledge that we have to move really, really quickly. But one of the sort of unwanted side effects is that it obviously raises the stress levels. People almost don't have time to draw breath before they're into the next initiative. So, at SAP, one of the things we're doing is we're training people across the board in mindfulness, just trying to find ways to help people cope with the pace of change without, creating, mental health issues for themselves. So be interested to hear if that's a challenge in your industry and how you're tackling it.
It is. We've done it would have been something that we're very health and safety focused within naturally the construction industry. It's huge aspect. I say when you go back 100 years ago and during the Industrial Revolution, when skyscrapers were being built in New York City, how many workers probably died during the construction of those. So it's unacceptable anymore. And therefore the health and safety aspect, and I suppose over the past it's been very much focused on natural and physical safety, but mental awareness and mental aspect of it and the wellness is huge now, to the point where we're extending the services we offer our workers. Many of the construction industry naturally is very heavily male dominated, so actually demographics are somewhat against us in terms of the cohort in the society which are at risk of mental stress and burnout and so forth, and the fact that very often they're working away from families for long periods of time in construction sites, which can be in not the most accessible places in the world and so forth. So we've ramped it up. It's part of the industry. Every one of our peers, competitors, contractors working within the industry, we're seeing more and more being applied to that. And very often people, I know in conversations like this, people think, well, what can we learn from even the pandemic to a certain extent and make sure we carry that forward as we return back to normal? And I've heard many people say that work-life balance that actually was not almost forced on you. You were forced almost to take a step back. Maybe when you were working from, you didn't have that lengthy commute or whatever it happened to be. Taking some of the good things we've learned from actually been forced on us and holding on to those. I've heard so many people talk about, and I hope that actually can stick. I think it's easy to say it as we slowly ease back into normality, but I hope that in time, whatever industry people are in, that they can keep that balance of work-life balance, which I think really supports their mental well-being, and not get back into that rat race that we all had just before March of 2020.
Yeah, it's back to that balance again, isn't it? What we touched on earlier, and it's when we were forced to go to work from home, some people thrived in that environment, and others struggled. My heart goes out to those parents who had young children that weren't able to go to school. We're trying to juggle them, work, and everything else in the life, and hopefully, the employees were as flexible as it could be to support that. It is a challenge and finding that balance. And we keep, for me, we keep coming back to something that seems to be at the centre of this, and that's people. We dropped into talent there earlier. We were talking about, workforce management and how leadership work and how we engage with each other, if you like, as people, and putting people at the centre of things. Or am I getting it wrong here?
I don't think so. As long as I've been in the IT industry, and that's been decades, we've always talked about people, processes, and technology. And I think what this pandemic's shown us, and in some ways it's actually been interesting because, getting on a Zoom call and seeing someone, trying to be professional on a call while their kids are running in and out the room, it's kind of humanized business in some ways. It's made you realize that this person isn't an FTE in a spreadsheet. They've got a family, they've got all sorts of issues that they're dealing with. So I think that's something that hopefully we all learn a bit from. But this confluence of people, processes, and technology, I think what we are going to see is that the ability to automate processes with things like robotic process automation and machine learning routines and the like is going to take away a lot of the mundane work that people have been doing and actually unleash them to do more interesting work, whether that's engaging with customers or solving more complicated problems working collaboratively with suppliers, whatever it is, that only humans can do. I think we're going to get better at that, and that will be accelerated coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think you're right there, and that is kind of, for me, that sensible use of automation. There's often the nervousness around automation. Is it going to remove jobs? And like you said there, I feel if it is used properly, you can take those mundane tasks you talked about and kind of allow the more creative flow from people to focus on the future, focus on, creating, innovating, etc., etc. And there's obviously lots to be done. We talked about the jobs to be done to transform for tomorrow's world. There seems to be a lot of jobs to be done there. And I think what we're certainly looking to do is work with you, Simon, and your team at SAP on, bringing more in-depth information out in the coming months for our members around those jobs to be done and, what we need to be focusing on. And it's been great chatting to you guys. We just about run out of time as well, I think, on what we were hoping for. And just coming towards the end, is there anything you would like to add, or one tip for companies to maybe focus on now as we close out?
Yeah, I guess from my point of view, it would be we've come through an extraordinary period in our lives with this pandemic. And it's taken a lot of courage and resilience and effort to come through that. And I would say, looking to the future, just keep that courage going. Don't be afraid to drive change rather than having it imposed on you. Because if you're not driving that change, you're going to be falling behind. You're going to become irrelevant, and your business might wind up being sidelined more quickly than you might think.
Thank you. Key thoughts, I think. Philip?
Yeah, I think I would echo everything Simon said there. Like, change is inevitable. It's always been there. It might just come faster at us, but there's no point in being scared about it. You just have to embrace it. And yes, it doesn't satisfy and suit everyone. So it is probably, whether it be trying to balance that work-life balance or whatever it happens to be, you just have to find what's right for you. Obviously, as we talked about well-being, some people just need to know when it's not right for them, and accept that, I suppose, to a certain extent, and then others will obviously accelerate forward. So it's just a matter of understanding and seeing where it's coming from and making the call that satisfies your needs ultimately first, and then if that is aligned with your business and your organization, even better. But yes, just really embrace it and move forward.
Well, thank you both very much. And just to add to that, the only thing I would maybe suggest from my side would be thinking about the long term. Make sure you and your business are in this for the long term, and you're not just thinking about the next quarter, the next 6 months. I think what's been shown to me through this pandemic, especially early in the pandemic, is perhaps those organizations that were perhaps short-sighted, that were caught out in their industry, struggled a lot. But those that perhaps kind of think about the long term and looking at their business plans for maybe 5, 10, 15 years in advance in the future are really those that can be here in it for the long game. And I think that's a one to focus on. So, thank you very much to you both. Philip, Simon, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. Just one of the things that we've touched on this conversation is well-being as well. And from the user group perspective, we've run lots of mindfulness and positive mental health sessions throughout the past year. Do visit our website at sapusers.org for more information on the user group, and also to access any of those wellbeing sessions you want to. As I mentioned, we will be working with Simon and his team around bringing more in-depth information to you on all of these jobs to be done, so you can make sure that you and your business are ready for tomorrow's world. We hope you found this conversation to be valuable, and Follow us on all social media platforms. And until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and keep washing your hands.